Our passage today is from the 15th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. We're picking out verses 21 through 28 of the selection from the pericope, entitled A Woman's Faith. Jesus left and went to the territory near the cities of Tyre and Sidon. Suddenly a Canaanite woman from there came out shouting, "Lord and Son of David, have pity on me. My daughter is full of demons." Jesus did not say a word, but the woman kept following along and shouting. So his disciples came up and asked him to send her away. Jesus said, "I was sent only to the people of Israel. They are like a flock of lost sheep." The woman came closer. Then she knelt down and begged, "Please help me, Lord." Jesus replied, "It isn't right to take food away from children and feed it to the dogs." "Lord, that's true," the woman said, "but even dogs get the crumbs that fall from the owner's table." Jesus answered, "Dear woman, you really do have a lot of faith, and you will be given what you want." At that moment, her daughter was healed. May God add a blessing to the hearing, to the reading, to the understanding, and now to the singing of the story of God's people.
She came to Jesus from outside the fold. Canaanite woman, persistent and bold. Looking to Jesus, she wanted to see one who would help her and set her child free.
Nonetheless, she persisted. There's a favorite story in the Old Testament. For so many people, it is the narrative of the children of Israel leaving Egypt and finding hardship on traversing into the wilderness. All of this is tethered to their new given freedom. One of the more interesting themes in their journey through the wilderness is that the story provides hope for us all without ever offering any easy answers for our difficult situations in life. We remember the story. The children of Israel had spent 400 years in slavery and were free at last. Free at last. But before they had any time to relax or even celebrate, they suddenly came upon the waters of the Red Sea. Without a hovercraft, a boat, a ferry, or the new Lincoln or East End bridges in sight, there was no way to get across. To complicate matters, and matters always seem to get more complicated, nothing is ever real simple in life, they turned around and they see the Egyptian army in full stride and full battle gear, trying to chase them down. The people start crying loudly to Moses, and Moses cries even louder to God. And God even cries out, "Why are you yelling at me?" Moses tells the people of Israel to keep walking. Keep walking? Question mark. Where are they supposed to walk to? Straight out into the water? The storyteller shares with us that no one moved. They appeared to be trapped and frozen. The water before them, the angry army of Pharaoh rushing up from behind them. There's a Midrash legend that describes how one man understood what needed to be done and he did it. His name was Nahshon. Say that with me, Nahshon. Nahshon is listed in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew and in Luke's Gospel. In Hebrew history, it is recorded that Nahshon died in the wilderness and that he was also the brother to Aaron's wife, And Nahshon is also known as the grandfather to Boaz. The etymology of the name Nahshon means one who has second sight or knowledge that others don't hold. A secondary etymology study of his name means the process of divining. The same word that we use today to signify for one who divines for water. Divination. So in this Midrash story, Nahshon sees a way out of this pressing situation that the people of Israel found themselves in, and he took persistent action. While everyone else was panicking, and maybe a few were praying, Nahshon decided to step into the water. He didn't put his toe in to see what the water temperature was. No, the legend says he walked out into the water. Nothing happened. He walked into the water, reached his knees. Nothing happened. He continued to walk until the water was at his waist. Nothing happened. He continued to walk until the water was up over his chest. And nothing happened. He then walked until the water was at his nose, and just as he was about to disappear below the water line, the sea suddenly parted, and the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea as if they were on dry land. I wonder how many of the Israelites were watching Nahshon walk out into the waters of the Red Sea and think to themselves, well, there goes a not-so-smart individual. But he kept walking. He was persistent. Albert Einstein once quipped, "It's not that I am so smart. It's just that I stay with the problem longer than most people." Nahshon stayed with the problem so long that the problem was finally solved God's way. Nahshon persisted until the waters parted. He actually divined the waters to part. For us this morning, we need to hear this story and discover that when we feel trapped, when we are up against the greatest odds of our lifetime, when we believe that there is no way out of our predicament or no hope for what is destroying us, we need to keep persisting. We have to find courage to take the plunge, to take not the first step along the path, but also the second and the third. We need to learn to stay with the problem longer than anyone else to find God's solution. We have to be willing to press on, even when it seems we haven't had any progress at all, even when the water is approaching our nose. Having our faith in God and having our feet in motion means that we believe that the waters will part, that God will hear our persistent cries for help and our persistent need for hope. The woman in our passage from Matthew was persistent. She came to Jesus from outside the fold. It says she was a Canaanite woman. She was outside the cultural fold. She was outside the religious fold. She was outside the social fold. And probably most people would say she was even outside the economic fold. The passage also says, but nonetheless she was persistent and bold. Looking to Jesus, she saw someone who would help her and help her to set her child free. All she wanted was help for someone else. Yet this was her daughter who needed the help. And yes, that healing would help her too, but she was, in this narrative, a voice for the voiceless. Something that we are always reminded to be in our relationship to faith and faithfulness. You and I are called by God to be a voice for the voiceless and to be that voice persistently. We are to be looking for people who are in pain or people who are being oppressed or marginalized. And we are to be their voice, begging God for help and going directly to the people in authority and giving them an earful till they take what we bring to them seriously. You and I, like Nahshon and this Canaanite woman, have to step out of our comfort zones and become megaphones. Megaphones for those who need a voice crying out in the wilderness. Eric Fromm, psychologist, says this about the risk that we need to take for others. Eric says the risk we take for others is actually a positive step for us in our journey towards wholeness and health. He goes on to write, to have faith requires courage, a courage to take a risk, the readiness even to accept the pain and the disappointment that might occur. Whoever insists on a safe and secure life cannot have true faith. Whoever shuts himself off in a system of defense where distance and possession are a means of security makes himself a prisoner. Rome is inviting all of us to step out of our security and into an opportunity to grow in faith by taking risk as we are helping others. One of the greatest statements in this narrative from Matthew's gospel is that when Jesus gives up and gives in to this determined woman, he praises her faith. In verse 28, Jesus heaps upon the woman with this praise. Dear woman, you really do have a lot of faith, and you will be given what you want. At that moment, her daughter was healed. Some of you this morning might have looked at the sermon title and thought that this was going to be mostly a political bent. In the last year, we have heard in Washington, D.C. and around the United States the battle cry, nonetheless, she persisted. But that is not what this is all totally about. In fact, that phrase has more history than just the last year. On August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified, and women in this sanctuary and around the U.S. were allowed to vote. Much of the movement that led to the 19th Amendment becoming law was called the suffrage movement. And even back in 1920, nonetheless, she persisted was a common celebratory statement. But I'm proposing today that phrase, nonetheless, she persisted, is also the same phrase that Jesus is saying about the Canaanite woman who would not leave him alone until she got what she was asking for. And I also think that the way the Old Testament reads, the same celebratory phrase can be said about Israel as they left Egypt and for 40 years, and then 40 years later entered the land that God was leading them to. We all can hear them saying, nonetheless, she, Israel, persisted. My question for you and for me today is this. When our lives are over, will someone say about you or me, nonetheless, they, he, she persisted, and their faith was great? That is one of the lessons this passage puts before us. Will someone say about us someday, nonetheless, they persisted? If we want to be found with great faith, we have to be intentional about taking great risk. We have to be intentional about being a megaphone for the voiceless and never giving up, even when it seems like there is no way. We have to find the courage to take the plunge, to take not only the first step along the path, but also the second and the third. We have to have the courage to stick with the problem well past when everybody else has given up. We have to be willing to press on, even when it seems we haven't any progress at all. Even when the water is approaching over our noses. Having faith in God and having our feet in motion means that we believe that the waters will part. Having faith in God and our feet in motion means that as we reach out to touch Jesus' hem and persistently pester him in prayer, that our cries for help and our cries for hope will be heard. The woman in our passage from Matthew was persistent. Israel was persistent. Now may we all be found faithful. May we all be found persistent today and every day after today. Amen.